Oh, thanks a lot for coming, guys. I just want to get started because I have a lot of content to cover. Thanks a lot for coming. Today I'm going to be talking about a playbook for how to achieve product market fit. It's sharing some of the ideas from my new book that just came out called Lean Product Playbook. Just a little bit about my background. Whoa, that guy. Hold on. That got a little messed up, but I'll just tell you my background. Basically, I have a technical background, then I got an MBA, and I went out of my way to study kind of UI design and coding. Work-wise, I basically spent my career in product management. I worked at Intuit on Quicken, and then also, since Intuit, I pretty much worked at startups. Friendster was where I worked. And then I had my own startup, so I finally kind of lived my own dream of doing my own startup called Your Version. It was a personalized news discovery engine. And then since then, I've gotten into product consulting, so advising companies on how to adopt lean startup processes and good product processes. So my clients, early in the day, I had boxed with one of my clients back in 2007. I consulted with Facebook, Microsoft, and a lot of other clients. I also organize a meetup down in Silicon Valley. If any of you are in the Bay Area, we have awesome product, UX design, dev, agile speakers. Definitely check it out. And then my Twitter handle is Dan Olsen, and I like to cover a lot of material. I want to walk you guys through the whole process, so I have to cover a lot of ground. So I'll basically be posting my slides at slideshare.net/Dan_O, so you don't have to get a hand cramp taking notes, okay? So I used to, when I give my talks, I ask people to raise their hand, like, who's heard of Lean Startup? Now it's kind of the opposite, who hasn't heard of it, and nobody raises their hand, so everyone's heard about it. And if you had to summarize at a high level, what's it all about, basically? It's about articulating your hypotheses, right? Being explicit about what your assumptions are, figuring out the best and fastest way to test those, deliberately keeping your scope small. That's where the idea of MVP comes in. Actually getting out and testing your ideas with customers, learning and iterating quickly, and trying to achieve product market fit. So if I had to kind of summarize Lean Startup in one slide, that's how I would summarize it. And when you look at it as a list of bullet points like this, it actually sounds kind of easy. Right? It's like, hey, that sounds pretty easy, right? But what I found is basically there are a lot of people who have read the book and are excited about Lean Startup, and they get these high-level bullet points, but then when they go to their own team or their own company and try to apply the principles, they run into challenges or struggles. And the best analogy I can think of is like basically when January 1st rolls around and you decide you want to get in better shape, so you buy some workout clothes, you join a gym, and you show up at the gym, and when you get there, you have no idea like what you're doing. It's not. I don't always go to the gym. When I do, I have no idea. It's not. Let's just analyze. It's not for lack of motivation. You clearly want to work out. It's not because you don't know you need to work out. You know you need to work out. You just don't know which machines, what routines, what to do, right? So that's one guy. Some people out there just wing it. They try to wing it with their buddies. Make it up as they go along. And then some people just feel completely overwhelmed. Right? So that's why I wrote the book, the Lean Product Playbook. That's why it's called the Playbook. It's a how-to guide. One of the best tweets I really liked about the book, someone said, in Lean Startup, Eric Ries explains what it is and why it's important. And in Dan's book, he explains how to do it. So it's a good compliment and really focused on being the playbook. And I'd love to give copies away. The best way to give it away is just to do like a lottery, and the best way to do that is on Twitter. So if you'd like to win, I'm going to give a few copies away to some people that randomly tweet, or the best tweets or whatever. At the end, I'll give it away. Just tweet, include my Dan Olsen if you could. Feel free to put a hashtag in. If there's a slide that you like, you can take a picture of it, whatever. I'll give a few bucks away at the end. Okay? So the other interesting thing is, as you know, a lot of tech stuff and Lean Startup stuff, there's a lot of buzzwords flying around. People use these buzzwords, whether it's MVP or product market fit. The interesting thing is product market fit. Does anyone know who coined that? I'm sure in this audience someone knows who coined the term. Mark Andreessen coined the term in 2007, and he wrote a good blog post that kind of talked about it. But it's really hard, if you look on the internet, you won't find a good post that walks through like how to achieve product market fit. People just take it for granted, like you either have it or you don't, and isn't it great that they have it, and it sucks that we don't have it, but there isn't really any guidance about it, right? And my background is more engineering, so I'm like, okay, if I'm gonna write a book, and I developed this in the process of working on my products and also helping other companies, I need a process that's based on a model that I can use. So I came up with the product market fit pyramid to help explain product market fit. Let me explain what it is. So basically the market is these bottom two layers of the pyramid, right? And it all starts with who the target customer is. Everything is dependent. This is a hierarchical model. So the next level up is what are their underserved or undermet needs. These are the needs of that specific target customer. So if you change the target customer, then the needs change. That's basically the definition of a market, the set of people that share a similar set of needs that you're trying to address. The product piece of the pyramid is these three layers at the top. So it's your value proposition, which I'll get into in more detail, but your value proposition is how is your product going to better meet those customer needs than the other solutions that are out there, right? What's your differentiators? But we're not actually talking about features here. We're still talking about customer benefits. Then you need to decide, okay, great, what's the feature set? What's the functionality that's going to actually convey those benefits to the users? And that's where, again, we don't want to boil the ocean. We don't want to go heads down and code for a year. We want to have an MVP approach. That's where MVP comes in. But even then, we're still talking about features and functionality. We haven't actually created a user experience, right? So the user experience is what brings the functionality to life for the users. And so that's the market, these two layers. The product is these two layers. Again, each layer depends on the ones next to it. And product market fit is just how well are those two in sync, right? How well does your value proposition feature and UX deliver on those needs of that market? So once I had this model, I was like, great, I can make a process around this that I call the Lean Product Process. And that's what I'm going to walk you through today. And basically all it does is walk you through, these are kind of like sequenced hypotheses is a good way to think about this, right? You're making some hypotheses about your target customer. Then you're basically making hypotheses about what their underserved needs are. From there, you can then say, great, now how are we going to be better or different in meeting those needs? You can work on your MVP feature set, your UX design. And then once you have a UX design, then you have something you can test with customers to test that product market fit, to see where you're at, and improve it and iterate, basically. So that's what I'm going to walk through real quick, and that's what the book mainly covers. Okay? And as we're going through and formulating these hypotheses, we're basically going through this. This is a modified version of Build, Measure, Learn loop that I created called Hypothesize, Design, Test, Learn. One, to not give people the impression that they need to build something right away. I see a lot of people use that as an excuse to just start coding and build something. And really it starts with hypothesizing, coming up with the hypotheses. And then once you learn, it's a whole different step to then modify your hypothesis. So it's interesting because Steve Blank recently wrote a blog post that has a similar kind of 4-step version model. So it just kind of is a little more finesse as you're going through that process. Okay? So let's jump in. The first step is determining who your target customer is. This sounds pretty scary and daunting, right? It's like the first thing you're like, you're looking into the darkness, I have no idea. It's okay to not have a good sense right away. This step and the next one of needs are really closely coupled, so you may be iterating as you are talking to people and figuring out what their needs are. You may go back and forth and iterate. But you need to start with some initial hypothesis. And I want to show you why it's so important. And I was just talking with someone earlier today about how it's really, a lot of companies, they stay at the superficial level. And I'll explain why that's not good enough. Let's talk about a customer need that a lot of people have for like transportation within 100 miles of your house. Like you need to get to work, you need to go to the grocery store, you need to drop your kids off at school. You have a transportation need. We have a common need that a lot of us that have it. But if we stay at that level, we're not going to get to the level of product market fit that we need. What we need to do is talk about specific users. So let's say there's a soccer mom versus, say, a speed demon. They both share that high level need, but when you start talking to them about what's important, the differences are very clear, right? The soccer mom may care more about, hey, can I fit all my kids and their gear in the car? Is it safe? Does it have good fuel economy? This guy doesn't care about any of that. It's like, hey, does it go fast? Does it look cool? Does it make me look cool? That's what's important to him, right? Even though, again, they share that same need, at least they're very different products that are a better fit for that particular customer, right? So it's like peeling an onion. You want to get down into the details and not stay at the high level. The next step, once you have a hypothesis, and by the way, I recommend using personas. I discuss this in the book. Personas are used a lot in UX design, which is later in the process, but I think they can be very helpful as a template and a way to capture your assumptions about your target customer. The next step is, great, what are their underserved customer needs? And that word underserved is deliberate. I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. But before I get into needs, I want to explain the best way, kind of framework to think about customer needs is what I call Problemspace and Solutionspace. And I've been talking about this concept for a while, so I'm really excited to hear people use these terms a lot more. So let me explain what the two are, basically. The problem space is basically where customer problems live. If it's a customer need or a benefit that you want your product to address, that's in problem space. If it's, say, a well-written product requirement or a well-written agile user story, then it's in the problem space. In contrast, the solution space is a specific solution that you built or designed to try to deliver that need, right? And there are plenty of examples of startups or companies that just start building something and they haven't really thought about the assumptions of the problem space at all. They're jumping straight into solution space. And so both are important, but you want to be mindful and think about your problem space before you get to the solution space, right? And so the example I like to use to highlight this is when NASA had to send astronauts into space, they knew that the ballpoint pens that we use weren't going to work because they rely on gravity. And so it wasn't NASA, it was actually one of their contractors, the Fisher Pen Company, that went out of their way, NASA didn't ask them to, but they went out of their way and spent $1 million on R&D and developed this awesome thing called the Space Pen. Have you guys seen Space Pen? They're pretty cool, right? They write in space. Faced with the same challenge, the Russians gave their astronauts pencils. You can actually get a Russian space pen. It's just a pencil in a box. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke. Now, I'll explain this in a minute, but the idea is just if for a second, assume these were both like comparable solutions that met the problem, wouldn't it be obviously better? This is better because it didn't take $1 million of R&D and all that time and effort, right? Now, the reality is, pencils aren't great in space because the lead tips break off and get into things, and the wood can burn. So that's not, I'm not trying to like poke fun at anybody. It's just for a minute thinking about if these were comparable solutions, right? So everybody does use space pens. And every time I give this talk, someone's like, that's an urban legend. So I actually put the links in the book of the NASA page and the Fisher Pen space page and explain that they did it. So the other thing is by saying, hey, we need a pen that writes in space, that word pen in your requirement is already kind of put your toe in the solution space a bit, right? By using that word pen. So that's the other lesson learned. We should have just said like a way to write in space. Would have been solution agnostic and would have stayed more in the problem space, right? Or a way to take notes. So that's the other thing about being in the problem space too. It can help you not constrain your solution space. Let's talk about an example that's closer to home, like a software product. So I worked at Intuit on Quicken, and you guys are probably familiar with TurboTax. So TurboTax is a software product, so it's in the solution space, right? It competes with another product, TaxCut, that's in the solution space. And the idea is you can map back and forth between these. And you basically ask yourself the question, hey, at a high level, if I had to say that what's the single customer benefit or need that these products solve for customers, it would be something like help me prepare my taxes, right? We can map it there, right? And Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit, when I worked there, helped me understand this problem space versus solution space concept well, because he used to always ask, we'd have a group of product managers, and he'd say, who's the biggest competitor to TurboTax? They would raise their hand, he'd go, yeah, TaxCut. And he'd go, no, it's not. It's pen and paper. Because back when TaxCut, in the earlier days, more Americans did their taxes with pen and paper than they did with TaxCut. So that's the other thing about thinking about the problem space and thinking about the market. You know, those needs are independent of the solutions. It helps you really understand what are the true alternatives or substitutes and what's the competitive landscape really look like. Now, once you have a software product, you can do more things than pen and paper, right? And we can peel the onion and not just stay at the high abstract level of prepare my taxes. It can check your taxes, right? It can do math very well. It can help you file your taxes instead of going to the post office and having to like stand in line and mail them. You can just push a button and file it online. It can help you maximize your deductions by taking you through a wizard and asking you a bunch of questions. It can help you reduce your audit risk by flagging things on your return that might be questionable, right? So there's a lot of different detailed needs. Again, it's like peeling an onion. We can list a lot of these different things. And when you do that, you end up finding that there are hierarchies and clusters of related benefits. So, and these are called like benefit ladders. And I want to explain again, sticking with TurboTax, we may say, for example, if we talk to customers like, what do you like about TurboTax? They might say, well, it helps me prepare my taxes, it reduces my audit risk, it checks my return. And if we kind of did a 5 whys technique on these, like, why is that valuable? Why is that valuable? It would eventually come up with things like, hey, this is about empowerment or confidence, right? Hey, before TurboTax, I just didn't even feel confident doing my taxes. And now with TurboTax, it walks me through, it gives me the confidence, and empowers me to do my taxes, right? So they would all be in the same ladder. And when you talk to customers, it's messy. They use different words. Some talk in very specifics, some talk in high level. And so that's why these ladders can be helpful. It's like these different comments you hear are all on the same ladder. Likewise, there could be a whole separate ladder, which all ladders up to a save time benefit. Save time, basically preparing your taxes. Like if you just literally had a stopwatch and did it with TurboTax and without, how much time did it save you? And also filing. These would both be time-based benefits. And there could be a third category of save money, say, because it's actually saving you money by helping you maximize your tax section. So again, you'll see these benefit ladders as you and your team work in the problem space and talk to customers and try to build this problem space map of what's going on in your product category. All right, and then again, we haven't talked about features, but TurboTax has, for the most part, one feature that maps to each one of these. So the thing that helps you prepare your taxes is the overall wizard. The thing that helps you reduce your audit risk is the risk analyzer, right? And so on. And when you have a well-named feature and it focuses just on one benefit, it kind of resonates with the customer because they can see, they get what it's going to do for them, right? And there's a whole thing, there's recently a good post I just saw about don't market features, market benefits, right? It's the same idea, basically. Okay. I thought I'd do a quick group exercise when talking about stuff. We'll talk about Airbnb to illustrate this concept. So think about Airbnb. I picked that because hopefully most of you guys are familiar with it. Focus on the problem space. Don't think about features. Try not to think about features. And what customer needs would you say that they address? Just raise your hand and we'll get some people in answers. What do you think they address?
Accommodation while traveling.
Accommodation while traveling. Sure. Anybody else?
Oversupply of rooms that are not being used.
Rooms that aren't being used, so like in unused capacity, right? Who benefits from that?
The people who rent.
The people who rent. Who benefits from the accommodations that you said?
Yeah.
So the interesting thing, first thing off the bat is they have two target customers, right? If you start to delineate the benefits, they have, well, I've got spare rooms and I can make some extra money, so I have a financial benefit of making money, right? And then the other person, what are the benefits for the people that rent the rooms out from the landlords? Yeah.
A wide variety of choices.
A wider variety of choices, right? More than you can get from hotel, that's right. Anything else?
Cheaper rates.
Huh?
Cheaper.
Cheaper, right? Price. Transparency, right? A review system and things like that.
Experiencing local color. Like
Yeah, that's a funny benefit. If you just said we're in the accommodation market and we have better price and better inventory, you would never talk about something like that, right? But now because they have a fundamentally different product, there are all these other social benefits of like meeting people, maybe even meeting someone today, right? Or like learning about the local culture. So again, you can imagine how we have two target customers, right? The renter, the person who owns the apartment, and the renter, and we can come up with these ladders of benefits that there's some related to money, some related to availability, some related to transparency, some related to safety, some related to like experiencing local culture. So I just wanted to kind of bring that a little bit to life with that example. Great. So the next thing is, say we do this brainstorming exercise and we come up with like dozens of benefits and we come up with this awesome problem space mapping with the ladders and everything. The next question is, we aren't going to build all those things in our product, right? We want to kind of be focused. So the next thing that comes up is, great, how do we prioritize all these potential customer benefits that we could deliver to the customer? How do we prioritize those? And the best framework I've seen to prioritize those is importance versus satisfaction. Let me explain that to you basically. So the importance is for that user need, whether it's staying somewhere abroad, or in the case of Uber, getting from point A to point B. It's like, how important is that to that user? And different people have different scores. But you can imagine doing a survey of people and kind of taking the overall average score and plotting it. The horizontal axis is satisfaction. Now this is in the solution space. It's like, how satisfied are you with the whatever solution you're using today to get that need met, right? And so we can use this framework to assess opportunities. And I'm an MBA, so I like to make 2x2s to make things easy to explain. So we'll make it 2x2. And let's talk about the bottom. So the bottom two quadrants, we've got low importance, whether it's low satisfaction or high. At the end of the day, if we're trying to figure out how to spend our valuable resources and time and money and team's time, these just aren't worth going after, right? Why would you go after low importance user need? A lot of times when teams do this, it's because they didn't realize it was low importance till after the fact, right? But if we know it ahead of time, we wouldn't want to focus here. In the upper right, now, we have a high importance of user need, so that's great. That's better than low. But we also have a high satisfaction with what's out there. Like I think about like internet search, like finding what you need online. Google does a pretty good job of that, right? I mean, if we just did satisfaction of how happy you are with Google, like, it's pretty good. So you're kind of up in this water. Does anybody remember a startup called Cool? C-U-I-L? No? So there was a startup several years ago that actually tried to take Google on. So they basically, I don't think they did this, but if they did, they'd be not following my advice, and they'd be going up here and saying, we're going to take Google, and you hear about people saying you need to be 10x better than the competitor. That's up here. If you're going to take someone on up here, you better have a way that you're 10x better, or else it's hard to unseat the incumbent, right? So in the book, I talk about how they position themselves against Google, and what they aspired to do, and how they eventually failed. Now on the upper left is high importance of user need, but also low satisfaction. This is where there are largest opportunities out there, right? In the book, I talk about Uber as an example. Uber is successful and huge because they've done a lot of things right. They've executed well, done well in their product, they've scaled well, they've marketed smartly. But I think unspoken reason that also contributed to their big success is that they fundamentally address an opportunity in this upper left quadrant, right? If I ask you, and you don't have to do the survey, you can just do a thought experiment in your mind. Imagine you talk to 100 people and say, hey, how important is you to get to the airport on time to get your flight? That's pretty important, right? How important is it you that the cab shows up? Okay, it's pretty important. How is it important that they take your credit card, right? And likewise, if we did satisfaction, think about the last 10 cab rides. How happy were with you about the timeliness? How polite the driver was? How safe you felt? How polite it was? You can imagine that people would be low satisfaction rates. So anyway, that's an example of a market with big opportunity. Now the thing about this framework that I like about it is very visual. A lot of my frameworks are very visual. And what I'm trying to say is the farther you are up and to the right, literally the more customer value that product is creating. So let's say we have a product that's addressing a need with that level of importance, with this level of satisfaction. What I'm trying to say is like the area created by that rectangle is how much customer value it creates. And if we had a different product that addressed a higher importance need with a higher level of satisfaction, it would create that much more customer value. And when you think about it this way, you see that opportunity is just how much room is there to move to the right? How much area is there to the right, basically, right? That's the opportunity to create additional customer value for an existing player. If this is the existing player that you're trying to beat, or if you have a product that you want to try to make better, that's the opportunity. And your goal, if you have an existing product, is to basically meet that need at higher levels of satisfaction. And if this all seems kind of theoretical or abstract, I want to basically show you some real data from a product that I worked on where we actually surveyed a bunch of users about the 13 key features and benefits in our product, right? And so this is real data. You can see I've got importance going up to 100% on the left, and I've got satisfaction going up to 100% on the bottom. And each of those dots is one of the 13 features with the scores that we got from the survey. Now, as a product manager, the first thing I keyed in on was this one up here. I'm like, cool, we got 100% importance, and we're doing 98% satisfaction. I was pretty psyched. I'm like, good job, team. The second thought I had was, great, I don't need to spend any of my engineering resources on this anymore because it's good to go. Let's go focus. Let's see what else we can focus on. And the first thing that popped up was this guy over here, because it's basically, relatively high importance, and it's an outlier of like poor satisfaction. And so if we focus on that, we can move that point up to the right, and then basically increase the overall level of satisfaction that people have with their product. And if you like this idea of getting quantitative about importance and satisfaction, then I recommend you check out this book called What Customers Want by Anthony Owa. That's why I was also psyched when I created this framework and into it. Then later on, I found out there are other people talking about importance and satisfaction. So Anthony is one of those thought leaders that had that as well. Now, another model, has anyone heard of the Kano model? Great, so before I came out to Silicon Valley, I studied lean manufacturing, and I learned about the Kano model in kind of quality classes. So it also talks about satisfaction. So here, it goes from complete user dissatisfaction to complete satisfaction. And then here, the difference is he's talking about how fully is the need met, from not met at all to fully met. The beauty of his framework is it breaks features and benefits down into one of 3 categories. The first is basically performance. More is better, right? So I was talking about you have to be 10x better, right? So say we were shopping for cars, and we're looking at 2 cars, and they look pretty comparable, and then we suddenly realize that one had like twice the miles per gallon that the other one did. We would buy that one because fuel economy is a performance benefit for cars. The second category is must-haves. These are basically, if you don't have it, it creates dissatisfaction, but by addressing it doesn't make anybody happy because they expect it to be there. Sticking with cars, say you were like checking out a car, it looked great, you looked at the sticker on the window, all the specs look good, then you took a peek inside and they had no seatbelts. You wouldn't buy that car, right? But if there were 2 cars and one had 5 seatbelts and one had 100 seatbelts, you wouldn't say the second car is 20 times better than the first car, right? That's how must-haves work. Once they're kind of checked off, you're kind of checked off. The third category is delighters. So here, not having it doesn't cause a problem because no one's expecting it to be there, but by having the delighter, it can really create a lot of positive values. Sticking with the car example, years ago when the first cars came out with GPS navigation, that was a delighter, right? Before that, people were getting lost, they were printing out Google Maps, and then when they had GPS, they just put in the address and it fundamentally changed, right? But the interesting thing, as you know, is things migrate over time. More cars have GPS navigation. We have phones now that do that, right? So yesterday's delighters basically become today's performance benefit features, which become tomorrow's must-haves over time. And the pace of that change is different depending on your category, but the bar is always raising, okay? Now, what we're going to do with the Kano model is really helpful in the next step. So you can think about categorizing your benefits as must-haves, performance, and delighters. We're going to get into value prop. Now that we've basically thought about what are the customer needs, prioritize which ones are the most underserved or undermet that we want to address on, the next question is how are we going to meet those in a better or different way than our competition? And this is basically where we can use the Kano model. And so the way I recommend doing it, and I've kept it generic, is just for whatever your product categories, list on the left the must-have benefits, the performance benefits, and the delighter benefits, right? You can imagine what they are for your space. And then you want to basically list the competitors and yourself across the top. And then you want to score your competitors, right? You want to score them and say, yeah, they both have the must-haves. These guys, competitor A is really the best at performance benefit 1. Competitor B is the best at performance benefit 2. These guys have this delighter. Just kind of create a simple overview of how well they're doing on these different benefits. And then you basically come up with your product strategy. And again, this can be a V1 product, or if you're trying to redo your product or improve your product, it's like, how are we going to be better or different, right? So of course, we're going to have the must-have as well. But our plan is, hey, we're not going to try to beat these guys on performance benefit 1 or 2. We think performance benefit 3 is underserved. Maybe we found a target market segment that really values that. Maybe we have some technology that lets us deliver a better solution. Whatever it is, that's what we're betting on, basically. And then we have our own idea for a delighter, right? And so the things that are your differentiators, what makes your product different, are the performance benefits where you plan to outperform the other products, and your delighters, right? And this is basically the essence of product strategy, right? And I would say that in my work and in my experience, probably less than 10% of teams ever actually go through this exercise to think about really how their product is better or different than the ones that are out there. And in the book, I quote Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs has a famous quote where he said, for every yes, when we make a product design decision, for every yes, there's 1,000 no's. And so one of the best definitions I like of strategy is saying no to something, as opposed to saying, yes, our product will do that, yes, it will do that, yes, it will do that. And next thing you know, you're kind of spread thin like peanut butter, not making anybody really happy. Okay, the next step is, okay, we've gotten really clear on our value proposition. We're not going to go and code everything and build everything, basically. We want to come up with an MVP approach to this. And MVP is probably, I mentioned how product market fit is, there's not really a good definition or model. MVP is the opposite. There's all these different opinions about it. You see these like literally pages that say like a landing page is not an MVP, and then a blog post in response says the landing page is an MVP, and all these flame wars out there, right? So the whole point of MVP is to not build the whole product all at once, but to build just a critical subset, right? And so that's one of the big mistakes people make is they overbuild their MVP. Right? The whole reason for MVP is to not overbuild your first prototype of the product. The second mistake I see, I want to illustrate by using this diagram. So Aaron Walters is the head of UX design at MailChimp, which is known for awesome UX design. He wrote a book called Designing for Emotion. This designer, Jesse Pasana, modified his framework, and then I modified Jesse, so I just want to give him credit. But it's another pyramid where the idea is we can talk about a product and say, how well does it meet functional benefits? How reliable is it? How usable is it? How delightful is it, right? And it's great to see, several years ago, the big focus was on usability. Can people use your product? And now you see people more and more talking about delight, right? And so usability is like, can people use your product? Delight is, do they want to use your product, right? And so we can assess a product. The biggest thing I see people do with MVP and misuse it is they do this. You obviously don't want to build the whole pyramid, so we're going to paint the portion of the pyramid that we focus on. They do this, basically. They go, boom. And so they build a subset of functionality, which is what you want to do. You don't want to build out the whole thing, but they use MVP as an excuse to shortchange reliability and usability and delight, right? I don't know if you guys have seen this at all, but how do you think this kind of an MVP does when you test it with customers? It doesn't do well, right? So then it's like, geez, I didn't like our MVP. Okay, let's kill that project. Well, that's really not the way to do it. The way to do it is this. Yes, you want a subset of the pyramid. You want a subset of the functionality. For the portion that you build, you want to make sure it's reliable enough and usable enough and delightful enough, right? And tying back to the value prop, you need to make sure that the MVP is bringing to life in a good way, what are those differentiators? If you're going to outperform on this benefit, then that better be in your MVP. You don't want just the must-haves and the me-toos in your MVP. You should really be testing that unique differentiator. Okay. All right. So, this is cool. So I walked into the conference hall. I sat down. The guy next to me was like, "Hey," and he showed this on his phone. His CEO, John. This was basically Olsen. Are you guys here? Yeah. All right. Cool. So that was totally cool that they had. I like this whiteboard version better. So they. Instead of rewriting it, they just put DUR. So I'm going to call it the DERF model from now on. That's pretty cool. What are you talking about? So thanks for drawing that. That was cool. So then once we were clear on an MVP feature set, now we're ready. We've just been talking about benefits, and then we switched to features. We still haven't created anything we can show people, and it's really important to build a prototype. And I use that as a generic term for something you show people to test your assumptions. And this is where UX design comes in. Right, because we're talking about features, like how do we bring this to life in a user experience? And the metaphor that I like to use for user experience is an iceberg. Because just like an iceberg, only a little bit is visible above the surface. And for UX design, that's the visual design. We're all visual creatures. We take in so much, most of the information with our eyes. We see shapes, colors, right? You're all taking in visual information right now. And that's what most people see and react to. But good product teams need to think about the whole iceberg. And so just like an iceberg, these other things are there, but you can't really see them beneath the surface. And when you use a product that works really well, that you enjoy, it's because the team behind it has put a lot of thought in. So real quickly, conceptual design is basically like, what's the fundamental concept of how we're designing this user interface for the customer, right? In the book, I talk about Quicken. So when Quicken came out, there were already 46 other personal software packages out there. And Scott Cook and his co-founder realized, they basically looked at him and said, we don't think any of these are easy enough to use for people. None of them people aren't really happy. The satisfaction is low. And so they came up with a hypothesis that mainly had to do with conceptual design, where they said, you know what, at the time, everyone knew how to use a checkbook. So if we designed a UI that looked like a checkbook, then maybe we think people will be able to have a quick learning curve and figure it out. So that was their hypothesis on conceptual design. They did a UI metaphor of a checkbook, and lo and behold, it worked out. It was easy to use, and all of a sudden they went to #1 in that space. And they like to joke about having 47th mover advantage in their space. The other thing is conceptual design is Uber. So Uber has a map-centric design. Map-centric is not the conceptual design. There are plenty of map-centric apps out there. Well, their unique conceptual design was, we're going to show you the taxis in real time on the map, right? And you can see them coming, and once you pick one, you see it coming to you. So that's their conceptual design. It had nothing to do with the specific pixels or the layout, like that. And the funny thing is, if you think about their value prop, which is all about transparency, someone said transparency for Airbnb. Transparency in, is there any cabs around? When are they going to come? Are they on time or not? The second you open that app and you use that conceptual design conveys that value prop to you right away. Information architecture is how is the information in your product organized and structured. If it's hard to find things and it's not intuitive, if things aren't where you expect them to be, that's because they've done a poor job there. If conversely it's easy to find things, easy to navigate around, that's because they've done a better job there. Interaction design is literally how you, your product, and the user interact with each other. So navigation, forms, controls, anything that they can click or tap, that's interaction design. And again, that really contributes to ease of use. So in the book, it's a thick book, it's 335 pages. I have a whole chapter just on UX design because it's really important where I walk through the whole pyramid, the whole iceberg, sorry. Okay, and the other thing that's important to reason to create a prototype is people aren't that good about, customers aren't really that good about having these abstract problem-based discussions with you, right? This is something that as a product team, as an entrepreneur, as a PM, as a designer, as a developer, you need to be thinking that way and building up these concepts and ideas. But what they can do is they can react to Solutionspace. If I've used a product, say I've used Salesforce for the last 3 years, and you sit down and interview me, I can tell you what I love about it, I can tell you what I hate about it. I can pull up the screen and see how I hate it when I have to do this, and I have to copy and paste and I do this. They can tell you, right? Same thing, if you show them a prototype that's got enough fidelity and enough interactivity to represent the final product, you can get really, really good feedback. I'm going to walk through a case study in a second how you can do that before doing any coding. But people can react to the solution space and tell you what they like. So that's another reason it's important to build a prototype. Now when we build these prototypes or design artifacts, there's a range of choices. And I like to categorize them by fidelity, which is how closely does it look and feel like, resemble kind of pixel level perfection to the final product, right? And interactivity, how much can I play with it and click on it, tap on it, like the final product. And the bottom left, we have the awesome hand sketch, right? Low interactivity, you can't click or tap on it. Low fidelity, drawn by hand, whether it's a whiteboard or on paper. This really isn't that great to show to people, but it's great for teams to iterate quickly and get their ideas. And the cover of the book is actually a whiteboard, because I think the whiteboard is like one of the best lean tools that are out there for teams to quickly kind of iterate their hypotheses. The next level up is wireframe. So sometimes people use wireframe and mockup interchangeably, but wireframe is typically a lower fidelity thing, artifact than a mockup. So here we're not worried about the tip of the iceberg. We're not worried about colors, right? We're just worried about layout. You also see them to be gray. We're not picking fonts. We're not trying to make it look pretty. We're just trying to figure out where are things laid out, what's the visual hierarchy, what's on what page, what's on what screen, right? And then the old workflow, like what I would call like 8 to 10 years ago workflow, that would basically be static wireframes. It would just be a wireframe you can't really interact with. And then you would basically, you might have an interaction designer, and then you would have a visual designer take those wireframes and then now apply the tip of the iceberg, apply colors and fonts and images, right, to make it higher fidelity mockup. That's kind of the old workflow. The new workflow is clickable or tappable, a higher level interaction. And the main thing is tools have made it really easy to do this. So you can see I've called out a couple tools, Balsamiq. Does anyone here use Balsamiq? So it's a great tool, makes it really easy to do wireframes, and makes it really easy to make them clickable or tappable, right? And then same thing in the mockups. You know, before you used to just get a bunch of JPEGs exported from Photoshop or Illustrator in a zip file. You have to sort out what to do. Now, again, as a non-technical person, as a non-designer, you can take those high-fidelity mockups, upload them to a tool like InVision, and then you can go in and create hotspots and say, okay, I'm going to put a rectangle. When they click the sign up button, it should go from this page to this page. And when they click this, it should go here. And so you can string together what we call a happy path. You can't possibly cover all the scenarios, but you can definitely do a happy path. And once you have a set of clickable mockups, that's a very good prototype that you can test with people, and you can get a lot of feedback that's valuable before you start coding. In certain cases, you might need what I call an interactive prototype that's higher fidelity, higher activity. If your product has a lot of interaction design, a lot of complex interactions going on. And that's basically throwaway code just to prove the concept. And then obviously, eventually, you build a live product that's the highest level of interactivity or fidelity, right? And just to show real quick, this is an image from the book. The book has like 50 figures and tables in it. This is a wireframe of an app that's in Balsamiq. You can see there's no color. We're not worried about fonts. There's no images. We're not trying to make it look pretty. And here's the same app now with a high fidelity mockup where now we have images and colors and things like that. And so a really good workflow for a team is to basically start out with hand sketches, have the team iterate on the whiteboard until they're happy with it, then take it into clickable wireframes. Once the team's happy with the clickable wireframes, then go and test them with customers, and you can iterate and get feedback there, just at the high level on the feature set and the things we were talking about. And then take it to clickable mockups, test it with people, and like I said, at that point you're really getting great feedback because it's high fidelity, clickable. And then if you've tested, and I mentioned in the book how to do this with waves of 5 to 8 people at a time and iterate, if you do this and you get to the point where people are very happy at this point, you can start coding with a lot of, and building your product with a lot of confidence at that point. You know, so that's a good workflow that people use. And then I do recommend actually, of course, once you launch it, then test it, test the lab. Yeah.
In the book, do you have examples of these kind of workflows for hardware and or non-visual interaction?
I don't. I think the concepts are, I try to call it like fidelity and interactivity, and I'm talking about pixels and pages and screens, but the same concepts apply. And so it would be the same idea of like, is there a way to create a low fidelity product, right? And I think that 3D printing is really changing a lot of the ability to do that. There are plenty of examples of like handheld devices where they work on the form factor with like prototypes and things like that. So there are ways to do it, and I think the general concepts apply. Yeah.
We've mentioned like things like little bits and Arduinos can help you get the interactivity.
Yeah, we're getting a lot better. So he mentioned little bits and Arduino. There's a lot better rapid prototyping kind of ecosystem for those things these days. Okay, now once we have our prototype, then we want to test it with customers, right? I mentioned testing, but I didn't actually talk about how to do it. Now, when I worked at Intuit, they were a pioneer in usability testing. We had $1 million lab. It was like pristine, had a one-way mirror. We would sit behind there, and the customer would come in, and we had a camera on their face, a camera on the screen. It was great, but the reality is you don't need that. And then since then, I've worked with a lot of startups. I ran Box's first user testing session, and it was just literally me, the user, their laptop. And then because people wanted to watch, we set up a projector like over here where the customer couldn't see it. That was what we did. You just need to sit down with the customer and you can do it. So I like to call it ramen user testing to emphasize you don't need a lot of resources and anybody can do it. And then some people, they literally like, Dan, it's the same thing. I'm on board with doing it. I just don't know, how do I structure the session? What do I do? And so I have a little template that I like to use, which is roughly, spending 10 minutes or so on warm-up and discovery. So don't just jump in right away and show them your prototype, but spend time asking them, great, what do you use today? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? Can you show me? What other products do you consider? Why did you buy that one? You're doing kind of problem-based discovery interviews and talking to them and testing your hypotheses, and you learn a lot. Some do's and don'ts real quick, some advice. Most people are nice and do not want to hurt your feelings, all right? So you need to debunk that at the beginning or else you're not going to get really good feedback. So you need to say, hey, you know what? Your feedback is actually going to help us make this better, right? If you don't tell us anything, then we don't get any value out of this. Don't worry about hurting our feelings at all. And then the second thing is, some people are naturally talkative and share what's on their mind. Other people are more quiet and reserved. So you need to debunk that by what's called Think Aloud Protocol, by encouraging people to talk and share what's on their mind and kind of stream of consciousness as they're going through it, which is unnatural. People aren't used to doing that. So you may have to encourage it a couple times. Do try, like I said, try to be a fly on the wall. Do not try to be too perturbing and too heavy-handed in the test. You do need to ask questions, but you don't want to influence the behavior. And definitely take notes. There's a lot going on. So especially for new testers, I recommend that you have a second person there who can take notes and can focus just on the notes, and then you review them afterwards. Some don'ts. Don't help them or explain the UI, right? This is the thing about usability tests. A lot of times people are like, hey, can they get through it? And you want them to succeed. So I've seen people actually grab the mouse and grab the login button and click it for the person. It's like it's not about like, can we game the system to see how many people can get through this. It's about the true objective truth of what's going on. The biggest variable I see about user tests that go well or don't go well is actually in the way the questions are asked of the moderator. The moderator asks the questions of the customer. In the book I go into a lot of detail, but it's actually pretty simple. There are leading questions and there are non-leading questions. If I said, hey, that was easy to use, wasn't it? That's a leading question, right? If instead I said, hey, how did you find that user experience? Or how did you, tell me your thoughts about that. There are ways to ask them in objective, neutral ways that don't lead people. Likewise, closed versus end. Basically I was like, hey, did you like that? I'm setting you up to say yes or no. And it literally comes down to, if I ask you a do question, the question starts with do, I set you up for yes or no. But if instead I say how did you like that? Why did you do that? I ask these how or why questions. They're naturally open questions where you get a lot more information from people. And lastly, don't be defensive or blame the user. I'm sure you guys wouldn't, but I've seen other people go after user tests. Can you believe that stupid user couldn't figure out how to log into our product? It's obviously your product problem if they can't figure it out. Okay, so we're going to do this multiple times. I recommend doing this in waves of 5 one-on-one tests with batches of 5 to 8 people in a wave. And then you're basically going to get feedback and you're going to iterate. And so let's use our Problemspace Solutionspace. Now what I like to picture is, we're heading in a certain direction. Based on all of our hypotheses and assumptions, we're heading in a certain vector, like a product vector. We're heading in this direction. And so then we build a prototype or we code a product to test with users, and then we show it to them in Solutionspace. And then we get feedback, and they go, yeah, I like this, but I don't like that, da-da-da-da-da. And they give you feedback, and you change. They give you some feedback that changes your direction. So then you take those learnings back into the problem space, and then you revise your hypotheses, and you say, okay, cool, we're going to modify to go this way. Then you go back again and test, and they go, well, I like this, but I don't like this. That's the nature of the iteration going back and forth between problem and solution space that you're doing with this wave of customers. So if we go back to our diagram here, hypothesize, design, test, learn, we can superimpose problem space and solution space, right? We started the problem space with hypotheses. We come up with design, prototypes, we test them with people, and then we gain those learnings back in the problem space, and we iterate our hypotheses. So this is really what's going on as you iterate. So this weird thing where you have to test in the solution space, but you revise your learnings and hypotheses basically in the solution space, in the problem space. Okay. People find it very helpful to actually have an example. So I want to quickly cover an example, a case study that I did from marketingreport.com where I applied this process end to end. There's a whole chapter that goes into this case study. My client was a startup that wasn't that big. It was a small team. The CEO had an idea for a new product, a new business opportunity. He had limited engineering resources. So he's like, hey, I want to validate this, see if there's a business opportunity here without doing any coding at all. Like that was the requirement. So that's what forced us to use those like interactive mock-ups, which was great because you'll see why in a sec. But the core idea was basically a marketing report. And the best way I can probably explain it is by analogy of a credit report. You guys are probably familiar with credit reports that show you your credit rating and things like that. And at the end of the day, they give you transparency, right? If you don't know your credit report, you're getting declined for credit. You're not really sure why, but once you get your credit report, it gives you transparency into why you have the credit rating and credit decisions that you have. Same thing here. The example would be like, I go to my house, I get some junk mail for some cat litter. I don't have a cat. So like, I don't want that. So that basically, somewhere, the reason like, why did I get that? I got this because somewhere in some marketing database it said Dan Olsen at this address has a cat. Let's send him a coupon because he might use it, right? So that was the idea of the marketing report, to give you transparency into why are you getting the junk mail that you're getting, and perhaps make it more relevant. Like, say I had a dog, I could say, no, I want to get dog food coupons instead. That was the idea. And so it was kind of fuzzy, so I basically led them through an exercise of mapping out the problem space and solution space to get at what the core idea was. The core idea was find out what they know about you, like transparency about why are you getting the direct mail that you're getting. Obviously, it's because there's some data out there. And you could basically have, then the feature set that was going to support that was a marketing report, which is similar to a credit report, a marketing score, which is some kind of score we were going to create, somewhat related to a credit score. The idea was higher was better, just like a credit score. And then a marketing profile, the kind of demographic segmentation that the credit card industry uses and direct mailers use, right? And so that was the core idea. This is what they really wanted to focus on at marketingreport.com. Then one of the execs had related ideas related to money saving offers. So maybe I could say, you know what, I don't have a cat, but I have a dog, so actually I wouldn't mind opting in and you can send me dog-related coupons or offers. There was a hypothesis, hey, maybe people want to compare their spending habits and shopping habits with other people out there. And because social networking was hot, social networking was in there too, basically. And then the other executive was not focused on that. He was more focused on, hey, I just want to like reduce the junk mail. I get a lot of junk mail. I just want to block it or reduce it. And we brainstormed a secondary benefit of saving trees, which was the green method. So I mapped this all out to kind of get clarity. And I said, great, now are all of your ideas on this framework? And they said, yes. I was like, great. I looked at that and I was like, that is way too much to put into a single MVP or prototype. There's too much going on here. So what I did is I said, great, let's do two concepts. Again, the green was the core, it was just kind of like, how did we want to vary it? So one was the shield concept, which basically would block, you would use the data about what they know about you to help block and reduce your junk mail. The other one was a marketing saver concept, which would use that data to help you get more relevant offers and save money. And so I basically then created prototypes for each of those and created mock-ups. And you can see, here's an example of a landing page we did for marketingreport.com. You know, I would call this medium fidelity. We didn't spend a lot of time obsessing about the visual design, but it has some colors and logo, and we thought about the fonts. And that was the main page. And then once you clicked in, that was the front page. When you get to the main page, it had these modules, and that's how we mixed and matched the two different product concepts. We just swapped out the little modules. If you were in the junk mail one, then you would have the blocker, the shield, you would have shield-related modules. If you were in the saver, you would have saver-related modules. That's how we basically did two sets of prototypes. And the next thing was, and I didn't talk about this yet, is recruiting people, right? We wanted to get people that were in your target market because, you know, the worst thing you can do is have all these things and get to this point, and then you test with the wrong customers and they give you feedback that sends you in the wrong direction, right? You need to make sure it ties back to that target customer layer that the people you're getting your feedback on are in your target market. And so what you do is you write a screener, which is basically a survey that's used to kind of qualify people. And in the book I have an example of the screener, but we did simple things like, okay, work full time, and then we said, hey, for the savers, they need to care about behaviorally, and I talk about segmentation in the book, behavioral segmentation, they should have already done things that demonstrate that they care about saving money, like using coupons or having Costco membership. And for the shield, it was like, hey, paper shredder, antivirus, things like that. We used a customer research firm, which is just like a place in the Bay Area. They have thousands of people who have opted in to do research, and then they screen the people from there. We paid them $75 for 90 minutes of the time. I usually like to do one-on-one, but the CEO wanted to go really fast and get data more quickly, so we did groups of 2 or 3, which worked out pretty good because we had some no-shows and it was manageable. Like Janice was mentioning how focus groups yesterday really, I totally agree, focus groups are just a mess. But talking to people in groups of 1 or 2 is okay. And then basically moderated them through the mock-ups. And what did we learn? So here's the same diagram. It's now color-coded with things that had, relatively strong appeal. Nothing was a slam dunk. No one was like, yeah, we want this, we're ready to sign up. But these are the things that was like enough, diamond in the rough there that we could tell. Green was some appeal, and red was low appeal. Like they just did not get it or were not interested in it. So the first thing I was excited about was this thing in red, the marketing score, right? That was this fuzzy thing that we hadn't defined. We would have to like sign some third-party deal to get some data feed. We had a bunch of engineering time to develop some algorithm. None of the customers were. So the cool thing is we could just say, you know what, let's just trim that fat. We don't need to have anybody spend resources on that, which is totally what Lean's all about, right? Let's not waste resources. The second thing was, there was no green, like people just didn't really go for the main concept. Like the whole core concept these guys had, the core hypothesis about, hey, people want transparency into their direct mail, no one was really going for it, right? It was lukewarm at best. Where did we get green? With the Shield people, we got green on reducing junk mail and saved trees. Again, it wasn't a slam dunk. And with the Saver, we got money basically green on the idea of life-saving offers. So this is basically the idea, this is the definition of a pivot. We were here, right, we said we're going to pivot there, we're going to pivot here, right? And we pivoted to the junk mail one because it was better fit with the brand, there was more overall interest, and here there was more competition, harder to differentiate, and we had to sign a bunch of biz dev deals and things like that. So then we did a quick round of iteration and pivoted to junk mail freeze. Right, again, we haven't done any coding yet, we're just living in prototype mock-up land, and we created a whole new product experience, prototype, that was about junk mail freeze. And the cool thing is, again, peeling the onion, we knew that people didn't like junk mail, but we didn't know the details of that. After doing this research, I had 8 pages of notes of what people liked and didn't like about junk mail. So what we learned is like, hey, what's the kind of junk mail you hate the most? Well, it turns out it was cash advance checks, and you pre-approved credit card offers. Remember, you don't get those as much now, but back then it's like, they would come in the mail. Imagine most people don't have a locked mailbox. Anybody can walk by and grab that. So people worried about identity theft and things like that. So we put that front and center on the new homepage, right? And same thing is funny things like people are like, oh, you're going to save trees. How many trees are you going to save? So we put in like 43 trees we're going to save, right? But it's a number. So we answered all those questions and concerns. So they're like, it's like you had this cheat sheet. We methodically went through every question or concern that people had and made sure the new prototype addressed it, right? And it was the coolest thing I ever saw. People were just kind of nodding the whole time through the test. Second time around, people were just nodding and nodding and nodding. It was pretty cool. And then, the other thing is we basically asked people at the end, and there was like a $10 a month. We asked people, would you pay $10 a month? It's always iffy to ask people if they would pay. But there was a marked difference in interest. And the first time around, no one was going for it. This time around, most people said they would. What they said is, yeah, I need a 30-day trial. But if your product did what this says it's going to do, I would definitely gladly pay you $10 a month. So that was a big improvement. But more important than that was after I was done with the test, I'd be like, thank you so much for your time. Here's your check for $75. Every single person was like, so can I use this product now? Is it out yet? I'm like, no, it's not out. We're working on it. Like, can I give you my phone number? Can you call me when it's out? Like, nobody did that the first time around, right? So it was like a kind of a secondary assessment of kind of product market fit that we got. So to sum it up, it actually took us 4 weeks. We did it very quickly. Again, largely because we didn't do any coding. It was all in prototype. One round of iteration, a reasonable cost. We found something that I felt pretty confident people willing to pay $10 a month for with the free trial. And just as important, not only was I psyched that we found green, we pivoted and iterated and had higher product market fit, but we trimmed that fat that would have just been waste, right? And what we did wasn't anything special or magical. You can follow similar results by following the playbook that I wrote. So to sum it up, the Lean product process: determine your target customer, identify underserved needs, figure out how your product's going to be better or different. Don't try to boil the ocean. Figure out what's that core MVP feature set. Create the prototype, test with people, and then iterate, going through that loop that I mentioned, and basically trying to improve product market fit over time. That's the summary. Now, what you may have observed, and I was tweeting about this yesterday, is what I described. Did I mention A/B testing once? I didn't mention A/B testing once. I didn't mention statistical significance. It's very qualitative. When you're building a new product, it's intrinsically more qualitative. You don't have thousands of users yet, right, that you can test it out on. Now, if you have an existing business, you may find creative ways to do that. But I'm talking about like when you really don't have that quantitative survey. You have no other methods but qualitative. And it's really important. In qualitative, what matters is each individual discussion, you're learning that awesome learning that you're getting about the problem space and what's important to them. And when I need to sum up qualitative, the person I think of when I think of interviews is Oprah. So I call that the Oprah method, the Oprah philosophy. That's what I've covered today is the Oprah methodology. I'm not trying to say that quantitative isn't important. Quantitative, you don't care about each individual response. You care about looking at them in aggregate, so you can make, get big statistical numbers about what's going on across the board. And then Spock is the guy that I use. So a lot of times we have this Oprah versus Spock debate. In my other talks, what I basically see is like people trying to apply Spock techniques too early, like in the wrong situation, trying to A/B test before you even know kind of what your first prototype is. So anyway, it's an interesting discussion. I do have a talk online called Lean Analytics, and there's 2 chapters in the book that focus on Spock and all that great analytic stuff, which I do like. It's just not appropriate when you have a brand new product in the investment phase. I mentioned I run a meetup down in Palo Alto. It's meetup.com/lean-product. If you guys are around, I encourage you to come by. We have Ken Norton coming December 10th from Google Ventures. I love the title of this talk. It's 10x, not 10%, moonshot product management, like how to dream big and not just focus on little improvements. And if you don't know Ken, he was a product manager on JotSpot and then transitioned into venture. And then it just so happens we have 2 ex-product VC guys coming. We have Josh coming in January from Greylock, and he worked at Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. He's going to talk about product management. So I invite you guys to come check it out. And with that, I'd love to answer any questions. That's my Twitter handle. Again, I'll post my stuff on SlideShare here. That's the book URL. And again, I'm happy to give out some books. For if you have a really, really good question, I will give you a book.